The silent collapse is unfolding across 10 U.S. states, and no one is stopping it. Not earthquakes, not natural disasters, but quiet pressures emerging within the very foundations of everyday life. More than 771,000 Americans were recorded as experiencing homelessness in a recent one-night count. And that is just one of many warning signs appearing across the country. In some states, people are struggling to keep their homes. In others, hospitals are disappearing, water supplies are shrinking, or entire communities are gradually contracting from within. What is most concerning is that no crisis happens overnight. Everything still appears normal, until you take a closer look. Today, we're going to examine 10 states where those cracks are becoming the most visible. 10. Washington. More than 16,000 homeless individuals have been recorded across the Seattle and King County area in recent counts. That number is larger than the population of many small towns across America. But the most notable part is not the size of the crisis. It's the fact that many people have started getting used to it. That's what is happening in Washington. This is one of the strongest economies in the United States, home to some of the largest technology companies in the world, one of the states with the highest household incomes in the country. Yet Washington also consistently ranks among the states with the highest rates of homelessness in America. And the most troubling part is that many cases are no longer temporary homelessness. This is long-term homelessness, months, years, sometimes even longer. Home prices in the Seattle area have risen sharply over the past several years. The cost of living is among the highest in the United States. Meanwhile, the supply of affordable housing and support programs has not kept pace with actual demand. As a result, many people are not simply falling into homelessness. They are becoming trapped in it. That is what makes this crisis different. It does not appear and then disappear. It lasts long enough to become part of everyday life. Imagine a working person driving to the office every morning. He passes encampments, passes RVs parked along the roadside, passes places that have appeared repeatedly in local news reports, and then continues with his day. No longer stopping, no longer looking back, no longer surprised. That does not mean the problem has been solved. It only means people have become accustomed to seeing it. And that is what should concern us. A crisis that lasts long enough eventually stops being viewed as a crisis. What once seemed shocking gradually becomes normal. What was once considered an emergency slowly becomes part of the landscape. Washington has money. Washington has technology. Washington has resources. Yet after many years, thousands of people continue to live in housing instability. What is disappearing is not only a sense of security. What is disappearing is the sense that this is a problem requiring immediate action. The most frightening thing is not the crisis itself. The most frightening thing's when people begin to get used to it. And if a society starts treating a crisis as normal, is that the moment when the crisis truly becomes the most dangerous? 9. Mississippi. More than half of Mississippi's rural hospitals are facing the risk of financial distress or closure. This is not just a healthcare crisis, it is a community crisis. Because when a hospital disappears, what is lost is not just a building. What is disappearing is access to survival during life's most critical moments. Mississippi has one of the highest rates of chronic illness in the United States. At the same time, many rural areas have a significant aging population. That means the demand for healthcare is not declining. Yet in many communities, the healthcare system is shrinking. Some hospitals have already closed. Others are reducing services. And many of the facilities that remain are struggling to stay open. The cause is not a single issue. Operating costs are rising. Population levels are declining in many areas. The share of patients dependent on Medicaid is high, and over time, financial pressure begins to exceed what many rural hospitals can withstand. That is where the story becomes very real. Imagine a woman suffering a heart attack in the middle of the night. Her family calls an ambulance. Emergency responders arrive. But the nearest hospital may be nearly 2 hours away by car. In an emergency, that distance can feel longer than any statistic. And that is what makes this crisis different. A hospital is not just a place that treats illness. It is one of the largest employers in many small towns. It creates jobs. It attracts doctors, nurses, and other support services. It is the heart of an entire community. When a hospital closes, the impact does not stop at the emergency room. It spreads throughout the local economy. Mississippi is showing what happens when a community begins to lose its most important infrastructure. What is disappearing is not just access to health care. What is disappearing is the peace of mind that help will always be nearby when you need it most. When a hospital closes, what is lost is not only health care. Sometimes, what is lost is the very heart of the community. 8. Florida. The Florida dream is sending out the bill. That is what more and more Americans are discovering after moving to the state. For many years, Florida was seen as America's retirement paradise. No state income tax, warm weather, peaceful coastal communities, and the promise that after a lifetime of work, you could finally live comfortably without constantly worrying about money. That is why millions of people moved here. But in recent years, more and more homeowners have discovered that the most expensive part of living in Florida is not buying a home. It is keeping that home. In many coastal areas, homeowners insurance now costs $8,000, $10,000, or even more than $12,000 a year. Some insurance companies have scaled back their operations. Others have left the state entirely. When that happens, homeowners are often left with only more expensive options. And insurance is just the beginning. HOA fees are rising. Auto insurance is rising. Maintenance costs are rising. Many condo communities have been forced to undertake major repair projects following new safety regulations. Special assessments worth thousands, and sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, are beginning to appear in residents' mailboxes. Imagine a retired couple moving to Florida to enjoy their peaceful retirement years. Everything fits the plan. The mortgage fits the budget. The cost of living is affordable. Then the insurance bill arrives. Then the condo fees. Then the repair costs. Then the electric bill. No single bill is large enough to financially devastate a family in one day. But when multiple expenses rise faster than income year after year, a life that once seemed comfortable becomes harder to sustain. For a retiree living on a fixed income, an increase of a few $1,000s a year is not just another expense. It may represent several months of groceries, medications, or utility bills. And that is what is most worth thinking about. Florida has not become less attractive. The beaches are still there. The sunshine is still there. What has changed is the cost of maintaining the lifestyle people once believed they could afford. Florida is no longer selling only climate. Florida is selling the ability to absorb rising costs. What is disappearing is not the sunshine, not the beaches, but the ability to retire at the cost level the middle class once expected. Florida is not running out of sunshine, but the price of living under that sunshine is changing very quickly. And for a growing number of Americans, the Florida dream is sending a much larger bill than they ever imagined. 7. New York. Every day, billions of dollars are generated in New York. This is home to many of the most powerful financial institutions in the world, the center of Wall Street, one of the strongest economies on the planet. Yet more and more families are asking a simple question. If this place is so wealthy, Why is life becoming harder? That is the paradox of New York. Extreme wealth and extreme instability exist side by side. In recent years, housing costs have continued to rise faster than many middle-class families can keep up with. In many parts of New York City, average rent has exceeded $4,000 per month. For many households, rent is no longer just an expense. It has become the center of the entire budget. As rent rises, everything else begins to shrink. Less savings, less retirement planning, less ability to buy a home, and less sense of stability. What is notable is that this crisis is not affecting only low-income residents. It is reaching people who once believed they had joined the middle class: a teacher, a nurse, an office worker. Jobs that once were enough to build a stable life. Today, that is becoming increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, the city's shelter system is serving tens of thousands of people every night, including many families with children. Imagine a child waking up in a temporary shelter, getting ready for school just like any other child. Behind that child stand luxury apartment towers worth millions of dollars. Those are not two different cities. That is the same New York. And that is also the uncomfortable question this city is raising. Does GDP truly reflect quality of life? A place can generate enormous wealth. A place can build taller and taller skyscrapers. But what happens when more and more families no longer feel that their future is rising as well? What is disappearing is not the banks, not the investment funds, not the flow of money through Wall Street. What is disappearing is the middle-class dream. New York's towers continue to grow taller, but the dreams of many families living beneath them are growing smaller. 6. Oregon. In Oregon, thousands of homeless families are now living outside of shelters. They are living in cars, in tents, or in places that were never designed for long-term human habitation. That places Oregon among the states with the highest rates of unsheltered family homelessness in the country. And that is a difficult contradiction to ignore. For decades, Oregon has been known as a place that emphasizes community values, progressive policies, environmental stewardship, and the belief that a more humane society can be built through the right choices. But Oregon is also raising an uncomfortable question. What happens when good intentions do not produce good outcomes? For years, the supply of affordable housing has failed to keep pace with actual demand. Meanwhile, rents have continued to rise faster than many working families can afford. As a result, the gap between what people need and what they can access has continued to widen. And when housing becomes out of reach, families do not disappear from their communities. They still go to work. They still take their children to school. They still show up at grocery stores and coffee shops like everyone else. They simply no longer have a place to return to at the end of the day. That is what makes this crisis so heartbreaking. It is not just a housing problem. It is the gap between the values a society pursues and what is happening in real life. The distance between ideals and reality continues to grow. Imagine a family sleeping in a car in a state that has always taken pride in compassion. The parents are still trying to keep their jobs. The children are still attending school. Everything on the surface appears normal. But when night falls, the car becomes the only home they have. Oregon still has strong communities. It still has people who want to help one another. It still has ideals that many other places admire. But the current crisis is reminding us of something important. Good intentions do not automatically create good outcomes. What is disappearing is not compassion. What is disappearing is the belief that compassion alone can solve the problem. And when more and more families are sleeping in cars in a state that has always taken pride in its sense of community, the question is no longer what we want. The question is why the gap between intention and outcome continues to grow. 5. California. The wealthiest state in America is increasingly becoming one of the hardest places to build an ordinary life. That is the paradox of California. This is the home of Silicon Valley, the birthplace of companies worth trillions of dollars. This is the center of the global entertainment industry, a place that is home to some of the world's leading universities, a destination for talented people from across the globe. But despite all that wealth, California is still struggling with a very basic crisis. Housing. Experts estimate that California is currently short millions of housing units compared to actual demand. For decades, the state has built far fewer homes than the number of people who need a place to live. And when supply fails to keep up with demand, prices begin to do what prices always do. They rise. In many parts of California, rent for an ordinary apartment has climbed above $2,500 to $3,000 per month. In many coastal communities, the median home price has moved far beyond what most middle-class workers can afford. And that is where the story becomes even more concerning. Because California is not just experiencing a housing shortage. California is making ordinary life increasingly out of reach. A worker may earn a salary that their parents once considered successful, yet still not earn enough to buy the home that the previous generation was able to own. Many people are forced to live dozens of miles away from their workplaces. Not a few spend 1 to 2 hours every day simply commuting to and from work. Less time for family. Less time for children. More pressure. More exhaustion. California does not lack jobs. California lacks places where workers can afford to live. And that is exactly why the homelessness crisis continues to grow. What is important to understand is that homelessness is not the cause. Homelessness is the result. Imagine an engineer walking out of the office of a billion-dollar technology company. Just a few blocks away, temporary encampments stretch along the sidewalks. Two completely different worlds exist side by side. One represents extraordinary wealth. The other represents people who cannot keep up with the cost of living. And both exist within the same city. California has money. California has talent. California has technology. Yet it still has not answered the most important question. How can ordinary people build a stable life? What is disappearing is not innovation, not technology companies, not career opportunities. What is disappearing is the ability to build an ordinary life, a stable job, a suitable home, a future that feels predictable. California does not lack success. California is lacking the ability to turn that success into a stable life for ordinary people. 4. Illinois. More than 56,000 people left Illinois in a recent year. That is the equivalent of an entire small city disappearing. But what is notable is that most of those who left did not leave because of a disaster, not because of a sudden crisis. They left because of years of accumulated financial pressure. That is the story unfolding in Illinois. Chicago remains one of the most important cities in America. Businesses are still operating. The economy is still functioning. But behind those numbers is a quieter trend. The middle class is leaving, one family at a time. Illinois has long faced significant budget pressures. The state's pension system is currently funded at only about 43 to 45%, among the lowest levels in the nation. The unfunded liability has exceeded $130 billion. Meanwhile, property taxes in many areas continue to rank among the highest in the country. For many families, the problem is not a single bill. It is the total number of bills: property taxes, insurance, the cost of living, the cost of raising children. Each expense on its own may not be enough to make someone leave, but years of them added together tell a different story. Imagine a family loading their belongings onto a moving truck. They do not hate Illinois. Their friends are still here. Their relatives are still here. Their memories are still here. And perhaps that is what makes this trend even more significant. Most people leaving Illinois are not doing so because they want to start over somewhere else. They are leaving because the financial math is becoming increasingly difficult to justify staying. And that is happening more and more often. No one leaves because of a single bill. No one leaves because of one difficult year. But when pressure continues for many years, individual decisions begin to form a much larger trend. What is concerning is that this change is very difficult to notice in the short term. One family moves away, then another family, then another. There is no major headline, no dramatic moment of collapse, only a slow drain of the middle class. What is disappearing is not the buildings, not the businesses. What is disappearing are the families that once formed the foundation of local communities. Illinois is not losing people because of a single crisis. Illinois is losing people because more and more residents feel they can no longer afford to maintain the life their parents once had. And perhaps that is the hardest form of decline to recognize. Because it does not happen in a single day. It happens one family at a time. If you live in Illinois, or if you once left, what ultimately led you to make that decision? 3. Arizona is one of the fastest growing states in America, but it is also one of the places facing an increasingly troubling question. Can the water supply keep up with that growth? In recent years, Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States and a critical water source for the Southwest, has at times fallen to roughly 1/4 of its capacity. That is no longer a distant warning. It is a reality unfolding right now. And Arizona sits at the center of that story. For years, the state has attracted people from across the country. The population has grown. Housing has expanded. Suburban communities have continued to spread outward. Areas that were once open desert are now filled with new homes, new shopping centers, and new residential developments. But there is a problem. The water supply is not growing at the same pace as the population. That is the central issue behind this entire story. Arizona does not lack people. Arizona does not lack investment. Arizona is confronting the limits of a resource that cannot be expanded indefinitely. Imagine a family that has just moved into a new neighborhood outside Phoenix. Clean streets, newly built homes, green lawns, a swimming pool in the backyard. Everything looks like a picture of growth and prosperity. But all of it depends on the same water supply. And that water supply is under increasing pressure. That is where the story begins to affect everyday life. Some areas have already implemented water use restrictions. Developers in certain locations have faced new limitations related to long-term water availability. And more experts are asking whether the current pace of growth can be sustained over the coming decades. Arizona is not the first state to grow rapidly, but few places have faced the question of whether the most essential resource for life will be sufficient for the future. You can build more houses, you can build more roads, you can build more shopping centers, but you cannot build more water. What is disappearing is not growth. What is disappearing is the sense of certainty that the most important resource of all will always be available for the next generation. Arizona is still building more homes, still building more communities, still building more of its future. But the growing question is whether the state can continue building when the one thing that matters most cannot be built. If you live in Arizona, do you think water will become the state's biggest challenge over the next 10 to 20 years? 2. Louisiana. Louisiana has lost approximately 2,000 square miles of coastal land since the 1930s. That is an area equivalent to an entire small state gradually disappearing from the map. And that is what makes Louisiana different from most of the states on today's list. Louisiana is not just losing people. Louisiana is losing land. For decades, coastal erosion, land subsidence, and rising sea levels have been reshaping the state's coastline. This is no longer a projection for the future. This is something that has already been happening. Every year, more land continues to disappear. And when land disappears, the problem is not limited to geography. It begins to show up in everyday life, on insurance bills, in home values, and in the decision of whether a family can afford to stay. That is where the story becomes even more concerning. Many coastal communities now face higher storm risks. Insurance costs continue to rise. Some insurance companies have scaled back their operations or withdrawn from high-risk areas altogether. When that happens, residents are often left with only more expensive options. Imagine a family that has lived in the same coastal community for generations. Their grandparents lived there. Their parents lived there. And now they still live there. But each year, stronger storms arrive. Each year, insurance costs increase. And each year, the future becomes harder to predict. What is worth thinking about is that the people living there did not create this crisis. They do not control sea levels. They do not control the storms. Yet they are still paying the price for those changes. Nature does not send a bill every month. But eventually, every community pays for its changes. What is disappearing is not only land. What is disappearing is the sense of certainty that your community will still be there for the next generation. Louisiana is not just losing land. Louisiana is losing pieces of the future that many families always believed they would be able to pass on to their children and grandchildren. And as more land slowly disappears from the map, the question is no longer how much costs will rise. The question is, how many communities can still be protected before the price becomes too high? 1. West Virginia. In West Virginia, the number of deaths now exceeds the number of children being born. That may be the most troubling sign on today's entire list. Because when a state loses jobs, recovery is still possible. When one industry declines, another can emerge. But when the next generation continues to grow smaller, the future of the community itself begins to shrink. For years, West Virginia has faced an aging population and a steady outflow of young people seeking opportunities elsewhere. But what is notable is that the story is no longer just about the people who leave. It has become a story about the people who are no longer staying in large enough numbers to replace the previous generation. A community can survive with fewer jobs, but it is very difficult to survive without enough of a next generation. Imagine a small town in West Virginia. The school is still there. The hospital is still there. The church is still there. Everything appears to be functioning normally. But each year, fewer people are using them. Fewer students in the classrooms. Fewer customers in local stores. Fewer young families in the community. This is the kind of change that is very difficult to notice in a single day. Even if no one else left West Virginia starting tomorrow, the state would still continue to shrink for many years to come. What is disappearing is not an industry, not a government program, not a natural resource. What is disappearing is the people who would create the state's future. And perhaps that is the most concerning form of decline on today's entire list. Because when a community begins to lose its next generation, the question is no longer what will happen to the economy. The question is, who will still be there to build the future? Of all 10 states we covered today, which story concerns you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.